Welcome. You're watching Africa News Network First Fast Live. My name is Cindy Mabi, and this is ANN7 Prime. Thanks so much for joining us. Now, has art become a tool to abuse freedom of expression? An offensive, sexually explicit painting by artist Ayanda Mabolo has raised questions over the limits of creative liberty. His latest painting of President Jacob Zuma is an explicit portrait featuring Nelson Mandela. The painting has drawn widespread condemnation, with some observers saying he's crossed the line by drawing Madiba in a sexually explicit way. It appears to be a deliberate quest by Ayanda Mabolo to offend and shock with his hatred towards President Jacob Zuma. Mabolo is not new to criticism for some of his graphic artwork, but has the artist crossed the line this time around? On social media, people have conflicting views on their interpretation of the painting. And we'll go across to my colleague, Deboho Mosia, for more. And of course, our live studio audience, Sfiso Mahlangu, resident political analyst, will join us in a bit. Professor Seepie is on the line, and Mlondi Mkhize, ANC Youth League spokesperson. We'll start with you, Professor Seepie. Just your interpretation of the latest depiction of President Jacob Zuma by Ayanda Mabolo.
Well, I even wonder whether it should be called art. I think some of these things are just rubbish that should be thrown into the dustbin. But what you have here is somebody who's attention-seeking. And the manner in which they seek attention is to insult black people, and also as a way of insulting black people, insulting themselves. But what you have here is that because this is something that has been informed by white supremacist ideas of undermining black people, you also have that idea afflicting and having infected black people. So that is, he's actually falling on that. He has, along those lines, people like Zapiro, that for them, insulting black people is a way to go. So what you have here is simply an Uncle Tom who's trying to make a name for himself. So it is not even shocking, it is actually disgusting. So I think what we need to do is to really to talk about what this freedom of expression mean, if it is to insult black people. But even during slavery, we've always had black people that were always enlisted to insult their own, to perpetuate the oppression of their own. So this should not come as a surprise. But what we must also see is that this art is a provocation. It is an invitation. When people begin to get to a stage where it is not a commentary, it becomes a form of violence. So we should not be surprised when other people might actually react violently, because when you insult people, you're not inviting an intellectual engagement. You are actually appealing to the base emotions. Your intention is to assault people's dignity. And there are some people who will take umbrage to that. But for me, this does not constitute art. It is actually rubbish.
So we'll come back to you. Stay on the line, please. Mlondi Mkhize, ANC Youth League spokesperson. Thanks so much, Mr. Mkhize, for your time and your reaction, especially with the defiling of former President, the late Nelson Mandela, in this depiction of what Professor Seepie has titled rubbish and not art.
Well, as the Youth League, we can safely say that we have been consistent in saying that the person concerned in drawing this is an attention seeker. But what is consistent about his drawing is the continuation of a portrayal of leadership naked. And we've been insisting that this cannot be accepted. This picture as well is not exception. You know, when people say it is incorrect for media houses to show explicit things in television and say explicit things in radio, and that is acceptable. When we say that it is wrong to promote things like pornography is acceptable, but we have got people who are going to accept this simply because they are not looking at what morally it entails. They are looking at what a person that they intend to insult about. And this is exactly the problem. And that's why we've been consistent as they think that we are looking at a wrong narrative. And I think that the continuous attention given to him is indeed something that we should think about, whether is it necessary, because we find ourselves sidetracked by such things. Indeed, Prof is correct. This is rubbish. This is nonsense, because when it stops making sense, it becomes nonsense, and that's what we're seeing. It can't be said to be freedom of speech, freedom of what? What kind of freedom do we have in South Africa that it has got no limits? And we have got no such freedom in South Africa, and therefore I think that we should, as society, collectively say this is wrong. We should not be having mixed emotions about it, because I can tell you the mixed emotions out of it come because there is President Zuma there. If you are to remove President Zuma, all of us would be saying, what a shame. And therefore, we should not say some things are not shameful because there is someone we don't like who appears to be a victim. We should be consistent and continue to pursue public and others that you are concerned about this person, but don't accept what is generally wrong because there is a person that you think because is a target, it is acceptable. And that's what we must not accept. It is incorrect.
Sorry, Mr. Mkhize. Just what you were saying, that we're all entitled to basic human dignity as enshrined in the Constitution, that despite your personal feelings towards the president, there is a limit at how you portray a certain leadership, including, in this case, he's even gone as far as depicting President Mandela in a very grotesque, very insensitive and morally incorrect way. So are you saying that the laws need to be tightened, or do you think that we need reform in the freedom of expression space?
Well, I think that first of all we need to put an end to what we want to call a freedom of expression. It is not. It is an insult. And therefore it should be treated as an insult. Secondly is that, you see, we are not going simply to learn as society. You know, right now, let me make an example. Why would I say that whilst others can explore law, that it must be looked at, we can't as society want to learn from a position of being infringed than a position of acting from empowerment of knowledge. Because once you say it's illegal, it's only then that people are going to stop to say, to do this kind of thing. I think we should act from a point of knowledge that we know that this is wrong, and therefore should not actually require that we enforce law. But with the kind of situation you have, you might have some sections of society thinking about that. We might in fact need to act in this particular way.
But I mean, it also feeds into the whole narrative that generally South Africans want Jacob Zuma to be removed. We've seen the number of marches as well, and the level of hatred that has been afforded to him. Do you think, though, that this artist has gone way too far, that enough is enough? We cannot be desensitized to this kind of expression?
You see, this is my problem, and the problem that we have as society. When we make a decision, we need to be all aware of what it means. But I think that we should say, firstly, before we even advance this point, firstly that we want President Zuma to continue to lead South Africa. Those that don't want him, they must know that there is a process that would mean that we would have to wait for President Jacob Zuma to finish his term in 2019. That's the first part. Secondly, is that even if you had wanted President Jacob Zuma to be gone yesterday, do not use wrong tactics, because when you have a president that you want and those tactics are applied and used to that president, you will be aggrieved. Do what you think is in the best ability of what is reasonably right to you, but do not do things that are wrong. We can't even say that because there are some people rented from somewhere saying that they feel that President Jacob Zuma must step down, and therefore we can even say we can accept that this could be a portrayal of that. Once we stoop to that level, as human beings, we would have lost the essence of us as being human beings, and I don't think that at any level under which leadership we should be able to do so, and we should not accept that. But I think it must be clear that President Zuma is the president of the African National Congress and that of the country, and will remain so up until due processes of 2019 unfold, and there is no other way that we can do it, because once we begin to venture into that, we begin to learn a culture that presidents can be recalled willy-nilly. We are going to run into a situation where Cindy, one day we'll elect a president, today we'll remove the president, next week. And once we get to that level, we'll not be worth being called a country. And I think that we need to respect that. I think a point was made by the ANC SG to that effect, saying in the NTC of the ANC that there have been lessons that have been learned through the recall of the President Thabo Mbeki, and we should not fall in the trap of wanting to repeat the mistakes that we have identified at the NGC when that report was presented. And that's why, as the African National Congress Youth League, we respected that wisdom of the NGC, and that's why we say that President Jacob Zuma is going to remain the president until 2019. Once we begin to be removing presidents like we are removing, maybe people that are appointed, we will have a problem. Disagree with the leadership, but I think that, calling for his recall is being adventurous.
All right, Mr. Mkiza, just stay on the line, please. We have in studio Sifiso Mahlangu, resident political analyst. Good evening to you, and thanks so much for joining us. Freedom of expression or sheer abuse and vulgarity at its worst form. What is your expression or your view?
Deplorable is my first word. Deplorable. How an elder, and I'm not even talking about a senior minister or the president of a country, or a father or a man. It is an African, it is cantankerous, it's an allergy that is growing in this nation. And it's not with this artist only that has even put President Mandela in this. He is a paid artist, and someone is funding and fueling him to spread artistically a narrative of a corrupt black government. Not just of this particular government, but to drag President Mandela in this suggests that he too should be looked down upon, even in his grave. And so you really realize that the gloves are off in this nation. This person, Cindy, has not just decided to take acrylic paint and brush and to just draw President Jacob Zuma and former President Nelson Mandela out of his artistic sense or lack thereof. He is communicating a message, and someone is behind that. But he is not the only one. We also have the likes of Mr. Jonathan Zopiro in this country, who continue to draw things that even incite rape. Last week, the Gender Commission came against Mr. Zopiro very strongly for a cartoon in which President Zuma was zipping his trousers after what looked like a sexual assault on Lady Africa, a woman covered in the South African flag. When you paint that, or when you draw that as a cartoon, in a nation that is struggling with women abuse and rape, you are sending a very strong signal. And others will read it perhaps as creative art, or suggest that it is a metaphor for something. Others like me will view it as disgraceful political narrative, or them using art as a political tool to deal with people. Shannon Onweaver, a well-known political writer, often said in politics and just before an election, if you can't deal with someone on policy, you usually deal with their character. And if you can assassinate their character, make them reputable, deal with their humanity, break down their dignity, and often, as it seems in this country, put their genitalia on newspapers and television, then you have discredited them. You have dealt with their families, you have dealt with their humanity.
You've stripped them naked,
You've stripped them naked, basically. And no one should trust anyone like that. So it is a political ploy, particularly now leading up to 2019. This is not just artistic. There are people behind this who are fueling this idea of a black people who should be looked down upon, who should not be trusted politically. But my question is always to men like Mlondi. Why do you sit down and allow it to happen and only comment? it is time you spoke to these artists. It is time you made a point in this nation that such acts, or even if you think they even qualify as art, are not acceptable. Because when you deal with mothers in this nation, you deal with mothers and fathers. You deal with Africans. So this is indeed an African, and I don't think South Africans should accept it.
Sure. Let's get a response from Mlondi Mkhize. Just a question on that. Beyond reacting with horror, shock, and gasping, that more needs to be done, particularly from the ANC and the Youth League.
Well, I think safe to say from the Youth League is that we will continue to engage many stakeholders. So it would not be an issue that we would maybe have mass action for, in our view, unless we identify it in a meeting as something that we should pursue quite strongly. But I think continuous engagements that we have by many platforms engaging in many sectors, so these are part of the message that we'll be carrying to say, let us equally look at how issues are affecting us and how some of our African brothers have tended to be instruments in wrong things and have tended to spread a wrong message using what they would term art. And I think those are quite things that we would continue to do, which would help then society itself and communities to be able to desist. Because part of the things that would spread such a message is the fact that we seem to have a liking on it and we then spread it. And those are things that we need to do, because once you are able to collapse a spread of such a message, you would have then stopped the message, and the person who continues to make that message would find no space, no interest in doing it, because he knows that the message would only sit with him or her.
All right, just stay on the line, please. And we join now by my colleague Teboho Mosia to give us a sense of how social media is reacting to this controversial painting.
As expected, everybody on Twitter is talking about this particular painting. Outrage and just outrage, really, on Twitter people are expressing. But interestingly enough, other people are saying that this is art and it should be invoking emotion and reaction. And this is just some of the tweets that you've been sending. Miss Biceps says, I feel sorry for Ayanda Mabulu because I feel he's so desperate to create a spear-type outrage to raise the price of his work, and it sadly never happens. People are saying he has done this particular thing before, but this time he's absolutely crossed the line because he is using Tata Madiba and the president in that particular painting. I am Mihloti says Ayanda Mbulu's drawing is still within the confinements of artistry. Who set the limit to art? Art is supposed to stir a reaction, whether it's good or bad. Of course, people are now also defending the fact that it is art and it's supposed to invoke some type of reaction, and whatever reaction it invokes, it is within the bounds. Now, Spokes Sam says, but Ayanda Mabulu and Zapiro's drawings are just artistic expressions of reality. You cannot expect them to draw a cake to symbolize tyranny. Of course, people saying, hey, it is art, let's do with what it is that needs to be done with it. SLB for real says Ayanda Mabulu uses the name of art to express the vulgarity and perverted psyche they harbor. Freedom of expression comes with responsibility. Caught me off guard there, sort of really making a lot of sense.
All right, thanks so much to my colleague Teboho Mosia there with the reaction on social media. We go back to Professor Sipho Seepie in the mixed reaction that we just heard on social media, and also the fact that this is supposed to be a reflection of what is really going on in the country. I suppose it depends on what your perspective is on what the true state of South Africa is.
Well, I think what we must understand that other countries have been through this. And they have allowed artists to insult them. And in insulting them, some people have provoked a response around other insults. But if you go back to France, where the Muslims were concerned about how they were depicted, in the end, they got tired of this argument of saying this is art and all that. And they went and they slaughtered those artists. And what has happened after that is that there was a degree of sensitivity around how other people feel. So if you're so arrogant that it doesn't matter how other people are feeling, then you are mistaking and you're abusing the sense of peace that prevails in this country. You are actually beginning to say the love for peace, or you mistake it for weakness. So I think that when you insult people, you are not inviting an intellectual engagement. And this is what art should be able to do, among other things. It must force people to think. It must evoke emotions of reflection. But this one evokes emotions of revulsion. So it doesn't matter how much people can try to put it. When something is bad and distasteful, you know it. And even the likes of Zapiro had always said that some of the most offending images, they knew beforehand that these are unacceptable. So this Ayanda fellow can continue. But like all people, every Napoleon has his Waterloo. There'll come a time when people will say no. And unfortunately, when they do so, they will be saying, we have actually warned him. We do want a robust critique, but insult does not form a robust critique. Insult is a form of linguistic violence. And what he does is to invite the very same. So some of us will not be shocked when people react in a particular way. What we need in this country is to say, how do we appeal to the best of us rather than to appeal to the worst of us? And unfortunately, I don't think that which he calls art is art. Actually, it is a trash, and it must be seen as that.
Professor, stay on the line. We have a caller, Bafana in Naturena. Good evening to you. Thanks for calling.
Yes, good evening, Cindy. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. We can hear you, Bafana.
Yes.
What's your comment or question?
No, I just want to comment about this painting, you know. Because really, this is very dirty. I was expecting the Save South Africa to be commenting about this. Those are the things that they are supposed to keep commenting about. But instead, they are keeping quiet when they see things like this. My worry is, if we allow this to continue like this, undermining blacks, moreover an old man who is respected all over the world. I'm not.
All right, we lost Bafana there. So just in the sense that no matter how much you may malign somebody based on your personal feelings towards them, it doesn't necessarily win the argument of whether they should be removed or not, because we are in a constitution that prescribes the same amount of dignity and rights for everybody, and this one has just simply stepped over the line.
I think if South Africa would let Ayanda get away with this, it has set a standard for itself artistically that anything is welcome in this nation. Someone tomorrow morning will draw a sexual picture of a child. Are we going to be expected to accept that? Will that be great artistically because, you know, his texture and his use of, the artistic brush is good? If someone puts an elder or an elder's genitalia and calls it artistic, is that going to be acceptable in this nation? We had that with Sarki Batman abroad, where her body was a specimen of like and enjoyment for many, many perverts. I don't think South Africa should accept that again. This is a reversal of apartheid. It seems like it is our people doing that to ourselves, and South Africans are the onlookers. And we look at this and we say, is it art? I think we must remember that this is the same democracy that gave artists the freedom to write, that gave poets the liberty to be poets, and actors to contribute to the artistic arena that South Africa is known for. But if one crosses the line, then there must be reactions.
Yeah,
we're
but
not
your
going to accept.
Sorry, Sviso, we have a minute to go. Interpretation of using homosexuality as a metaphor in depicting President Jacob Zuma and former President Nelson Mandela in such a grotesque manner. How else would you express it besides absolute, repulsive, direct hatred towards the president? And I don't see the art in that.
And I would think that, as the caller has said, many of these organizations would would respond. You know, you'd expect the Helen Suzman Foundation, you'd expect the bishops who are always so vocal in this country to condemn such acts and such art in inverted commas. But you won't see them because this is not an artistic symbol. This is dealing with a man and introducing former President Mandela shows that it's dealing with the presidency, but particularly it's dealing with a black government. And I think even the Department of Arts and Culture, the Gender Commission, and many other organizations must, from today, guard their loins and respond to this. I want to say before we close, Cindy, how long the Goodman Gallery took the last time to take down these photographs or pictures, because they wanted, you know, the reaction. You know, they were accepting money for people going through the doors and appreciating this this malice and insult to South African society that many people call art. And I feel that this is the point that South Africans, even the Youth League, the Women's League, the Gender Commission, must respond. And holistically, as South Africans, we must say enough is enough. These are our fathers and our mothers and our children, and at this point, you have crossed the line.
All right, thank you so much. We have to go. Sfiso Mahlangu, resident political analyst, joining us in studio, and political analyst Professor Seepie on the line, and Mlondi Mkhize, NC Youth League spokesperson. Thanks indeed for calling in. We'll take a quick ad break. We'll see you shortly.